Hi, I'm Roxanne Richardson, and this is the Casual Friday podcast. In this week's podcast, I have some vintage buttons for a brand new cardigan. I want to talk a little bit about knitting posture and how it can affect your body in unexpected ways, which I found from personal experience. And I'll tell you about the delightful experience as well as the horrifying experiences I'm having knitting a traditional Danish night sweater. So let's get started. I want to start with this sweater. I know you can't see the upper part, but the part I wanted you to see is right here. So I started this sweater earlier this summer. This is Brooklyn Tweed Quarry is the yarn. It's a bulky weight yarn. It's woolen spun, so there's a lot of air in it. It has twice the yardage that you would normally expect. In a bulky weight yarn, it has 200 yards in 100 grams. So it's very fluffy, very warm, but it doesn't weigh a lot. And it was in a light gray color called Pumice, which was perfectly fine, but I had 4 gray sweaters. I didn't need another one. And I wanted to do some dyeing. So I dyed it this very vibrant color, which I actually love. At first I was like, oh my gosh, that's really a lot. And it's got some interesting variation in it. I did this cold vat dyeing method where it was in this hardware store 5-gallon paint bucket for several days before I ended up setting it on the stove. Talked about that a few videos ago. What I wasn't sure about is what kind of buttons I wanted. I was thinking maybe toggle buttons, and I was asking you guys what you thought. People had different ideas about, oh, they should be wood, or you could get bone or antler, or yeah, toggle buttons would work, or no toggle buttons, or too outdoorsy, like an outdoor type of garment rather than an indoor. A lot of opinions, and I'm always interested because if I have an idea in my head of exactly what I want, I'm not going to find it. So I'm just kind of wanted to be open to ideas, and I really like interesting buttons for cardigans. One of the reasons I knit cardigans so often, even though I never unbutton them, is because I love the buttons. So these are vintage coat buttons. I'm taking a class at Treadle Yard Goods. It's a fabric store in St. Paul. It's where I was taking sewing classes earlier this year when I got back into sewing. I'm taking a pants fitting class right now. So the first week at the class, I brought the sweater with me. It wasn't completely sewn up, but I wanted to see if they had any buttons. And I found some things that were sort of in the ballpark, but they weren't maybe quite the right size. Size was a real issue, or they were color. Like I really like carved buttons. A lot of times you can get these carved shell buttons. They're so interesting. And so she sells these vintage buttons. There's somebody from the Minnesota Button Society, this Button Society of people who collect vintage and antique buttons, and she sells them on consignment at the fabric store. I looked that first week, didn't see anything, and then I went the second week and I didn't have the sweater with me, and I found these coat buttons. There were 6 of them, but they looked like they were the right size. I felt like they were a good color, but I knew they were going to be heavy. And one of the things that I was thinking about with this button band is that if I got a lightweight button, I wouldn't need to reinforce the button band on the back with grosgrain ribbon, because the sweater itself wasn't going to sag from the weight of the yarn because it's such a light yarn in terms of actual weight, even though it's thick. But if I got something that was heavier, I would want to reinforce it. And these are heavy. I weighed the 4 buttons before I even tried it, and it's 50 grams just for those 4 buttons. So I knew that I was going to have to reinforce it. Now this is a really wide band here, and I have a lot of grosgrain ribbon, particularly in black, and I have like 3 different widths. Nothing that was this wide, but I really didn't think I needed something the full width. And so I used my widest ribbon that I had, and I just centered it up the middle, so that when I sewed them on, they would be fully on the ribbon. And so because the button is sewn to the ribbon, which doesn't stretch, it just gives that stability so that this isn't going to end up being pulled down. So what I did was, while the sweater is hanging, I determined how long I needed the ribbon to be, so that the bottom edge would match up with this edge. And I pinned it at those two places. Now, when I put it on the table, the ribbing can relax. There's no gravity pulling anything down, and so it wants to pull it in a little bit. So then I would have to slightly stretch it and pin it in multiple places so that I could then sew it down. So I'm going to have to do that same thing for the buttonhole band, and then mark the locations of where the buttonholes are going to be, and then do that on my sewing machine, and then hope that I got everything lined up correctly. So I've done these reinforced buttonhole bands in several different ways over the years, and it really depends on the kind of button band and the situation, how I'm going to do it, what I'm going to do. And just over time, I'm like, well, okay, that worked better than the way I did it last time. So I'm certainly no expert. Some people won't do a knitted buttonhole. They just do the buttonhole in their sewing machine and then cut it open. For whatever reason, I'm wary of doing that. I'm not saying people are wrong to do that. I'm saying that I am not ready for that. And this is such a thick yarn as well. I don't know how well that would work on my sewing machine. I still have some ends to weave in, but I did get the buttons. I really like them. One of the things that I like about them, I'll show these to you on the overhead, is that these are carved and they're all different. I got 6 of them on the card of buttons. So I do have 2 others. One of these I wanted to use on here, and then I noticed that on the back there's like a little hook here, and it's not completely closed down to the surface. I would have to bend it down in some way in order to use it, figure out some way. But when I was sewing it on, it just slipped right out of the thread, so that's not good. So I used one of the other ones. But if I ever do want to use this someday, I'm going to have to figure out what to do. So I don't think these came originally as a set. I think that this person has just collected these over the years and got 6 of them that were the same color and the same size. Some of them are a little thicker than the others. The little thingies on the back, what are those? I can't remember what those are called. I'll put it on the screen because I'll remember when I'm editing. They're not all the same. They're a little bit different, which is what I really love about vintage buttons, is being able to find things that are that seem like a set that probably weren't originally manufactured as a set. And but it's something that I think adds nice personality to the finished item. So again, I'll go to the overhead so you can see closer up what that looks like. First, I wanted to show you what it looks like on with the buttons closed up. So it does seem more coat-like. It's that bulky weight anyway, so it could be more coat-like. I might be wearing it more as an outdoor sweater, at least in the early fall. And then if it gets really cold, as it does here in Minnesota in the winter, I can use this as an indoor sweater. But I'm really loving these buttons. If you don't like them, don't tell me, because I don't want to hear it. Just keep that to yourself. So here are the buttons. So I really liked this one that had this kind of ferns that were going out in the V, and you have that with the cable here. This one is chunkier. It's got more depth than some of the others. This one has got a cool little design in this one. And then the one on the bottom is like this. And then I'll show you the other 2 as well. So these are the other 2. They're very lovely. In fact, this is the one that I tried to sew on, and then it wouldn't work because you can see how on the back that's not quite attached. I'd have to bend it down somehow. It's different from this one. See, this one's even a little bit rusty here. They're not exactly the same thickness either, but they're all very similar. They're close enough. last Casual Friday, I was telling you about some issues I was having with my shoulder that was causing problems with spinning, like being able to pull my arm back, just things like, you know, I could get a shirt on, but trying to get my shirt off was a problem. And I don't think I told you guys this. I was also having a problem with my left hip. And it was the fact that the left hip problem showed up that caused me to go to the doctor, because I couldn't sleep on my right shoulder because it hurt my shoulder. But then when I was sleeping on my left side, my hip was hurting. And I'm like, I need to be able to sleep. So that's why I went to the doctor. So she referred me to physical therapy and also to get an MRI. She was thinking it might be frozen shoulder, but I didn't have any of the typical risk factors that would make it more likely for someone of my age to get frozen shoulder. I don't have diabetes, I don't have thyroid problems, I don't have Parkinson's, I don't have heart disease. You know, those things can make you more likely to get it. Sometimes you just get it. Oftentimes it's from overuse, like especially if you're doing like a lot of overhead stuff, that might be a problem. So I had 2 physical therapy appointments before I got my MRI. And both of the physical therapists were pretty sure that it was frozen shoulder and that there was no problem with my rotator cuff, that I didn't have a tear or anything in that. So I did have an MRI, and then I went to see an orthopedist, and it confirmed adhesive capsulitis, which is the technical term for frozen shoulder. And there were a few other things listed too that I couldn't understand if that was supporting the diagnosis of frozen shoulder or if those were additional things, and if there was something I should be doing differently or in addition to in my physical therapy. You know, I didn't know what, because the physical therapy has been helping. And that has been a relief to me, because I was told it could be a couple of years in order to get everything back again. And many of you in the comments have told me it took you a number of years, and some of you hadn't gotten your full range of motion back, maybe 90%. So I just wanted to go to the orthopod just to, you know, confirm. And he was very, I was a very boring patient for him, because there was just not anything for him to do. Yes, it's frozen shoulder. The other things listed, like, it would show up on anyone over 25 or anyone who's my age. That's just like normal wear and tear. But he did say there's tendinopathy in there, and that can cause the adhesive capsulitis, and that's generally from overuse. And I said, well, my physical therapist is thinking that it might have to do with my knitting position, where, you know, I'm always kind of showing him my knitting position. He's like, well, it could be underused too. So he walked out. So the physical therapists are great, because they spend 40 minutes with you. They actually touch you. They figure out what's going on in your whole body. And it turns out that my hip thing is probably related to my shoulder thing. And this has to do with my body position when I'm knitting. And every knitter is unique. Their knitting style is unique. They might be very similar, how you hold the yarn, how you tension, but everybody's got micro movements that are different. They might hold their shoulders differently. They might hold their body differently. They sit in a different kind of chair. There's a book that gets recommended a lot. It's called Knitting Comfortably. It was written by Carson Demers. He is a knitter who is also a physical therapist. So he talks about, you know, doing things to help you prevent injury to your body. So I immediately went in there and was looking up all the stuff with shoulders, and it didn't seem related to me. I am going to go through there and find other things that have to do with posture, though, because I think it's my posture and the position I'm holding my body when I'm knitting that has caused all this. So I don't have arms on this chair, but my desk is very tall. I could stand at it. So I use a drafting chair, and this is a chair I bought in 2018. Probably the year that I started doing Casual Friday. Before that, I just had like one of the chairs we have at our kitchen island. So it's tall, but it didn't have any arms to it. one of the things I'd noticed over the years of editing my videos is that I'll start out like this, make sure I'm framed in camera, and pretty soon I'm ending up like this. And I always have one shoulder higher than the other. And it drives me crazy. And I go look, and I felt like, oh, my body, maybe I'm getting a little bit of scoliosis as I age, because, my hips, one of them seems rounder than the other. And then I started having this hip problem. And there's no arthritis. My joints apparently are great, which I'm very happy about. What the second physical therapist realized, because I said something about, I wonder if my shoulder issues from the way that I hold my right arm. It's very still and very close. Let me stand up so you can actually see. So I usually hold it right here, like this. And then this elbow rests on the armrest. And this is how I knit. So I'm always leaning on this arm. So if you've watched my channel a while, you'll know that one year for Finish It February, I patched the elbows of one of my favorite sweaters, because I'm always leaning on that elbow, and I kind of wear through my t-shirts, and I'd kind of really more in a thin spot in that sweater. But that's, I'm always knitting like that. And what she said is that the whole left half of my body is like more engaged. Like you can just feel the difference on my back. Like the right side of my back is more relaxed, and the left half is like, because I'm always leaning on it. And I think because I'm always leaning on it, then when I'm sitting here doing the videos, I end up like this, because I'm used to putting pressure on this that pushes this side down more. So I'm really concentrating on keeping both arms to my side, and I've got a lumbar pillow in the back to help me sit up straight and remind me. So I'm really working on my posture as I knit, so that pillow really helps kind of keep me more in position. I still end up wanting to kind of slump a little bit, but it just doesn't let my spine curve as much. And so then she also gave me some exercises to do specifically for my hip to strengthen my glutes and stuff. And one of the things is like just doing this standing up and sitting down on a regular chair and squeezing my glutes together. That is something I never do, because my chair is so high, I just kind of slide off of it to get out. So I'm never, engaging those lower muscles. Even though, I ride my bike and I walk every evening, I'm getting the exercise that they say you should get, but it's all just walking and riding my bike. And I'm not doing anything to kind of strengthen my lower back, and I have this weird posture thing when I'm knitting. So I'm really working on that, and I'm also working on going forward, once I've healed this shoulder, what I can do to make sure that my core is being maintained, so that as I age more, that I'm still, all my joints, everything is still in good shape. Because the more sedentary I am, the more my back hurts. And so I really need to do things to kind of strengthen myself all over. So she showed me some yoga things that I can do with my shoulder. And so probably as I get more range of motion and I can be done with the physical therapy, just learn more about some yoga that I can do, so that I stay strong and healthy for as long as possible. But I just wanted to bring that up, because I think I really underestimated how important knitting posture was, because I'm really mindful about my wrists and hands and not overdoing that, and making sure that if I am knitting something like, say, on really large needles that might hurt my hands, that I take a break from that and do something else. But I've never really paid attention to my posture and all of that while I was knitting, and that has ended up affecting this shoulder from lack of movement, because I'm so still and I'm not getting up and doing things to counteract that. So that's one of the things that I'm trying to do, is if I'm sitting still doing this, then I need to do something that's opening my chest up more, and just maintaining that range of motion. So that's just a cautionary tale that I want to share with you. And again, you might find this book, it's a hardcover book, it's very heavy. You might be able to get it from a library or maybe on Kindle, I don't know. I don't know if this was self-published or not, but I definitely ordered it directly from him when I bought it a few years ago. But it's really highly thought of amongst the knitting community. He's taught classes for our guild at our annual Yarn Over event. Often, this is just things to keep in mind, just how your knitting position is with your hands and all of that, but also with the rest of your body. And just take care of your body, because if you're like me, you're going to want to be able to knit until you want to die with your knitting needles in your hand. But things are improving. The physical therapy is really helping, and I'm really happy about that. And I am just paying more attention to how I'm sitting. So if you catch me in the video like this, know that I'm working on that. I'm trying to sit up straighter and have better posture constantly, not just while I'm knitting. So recently I started a new project. It's one that I'd been wanting to knit for probably 5 years or so. It's from this book, Traditional Danish Sweaters by Vivian Hoxbro. And there was a specific sweater in here that I really liked. I was telling you guys about this last time. It's got a section on the history of these traditional sweaters. These are the oldest, what I would call actual sweaters that we have. They're not just, an upper body knitted garment. It's like a sweater made from wool, worn as part of regular daily wear, but hundreds of years old, not a product of the mid-19th century or mid-20th century as most traditional sweaters are. And so this is something that's intrigued me, because I did that whole project where I knit a sweater from each decade from the 1890s to the 1990s. I have wanted to go back to sweater styles that were traditional prior to written patterns for sweater styles. So, that was what my project was about. So this is one of them. So it's a big section on the history of these sweaters, lots of photographs from different regions and different time periods, because the length of them changed in different time periods. Then there's a whole stitch dictionary of all of these elements. These stars, these 8-pointed stars that are done in knit pearls, are really common and ubiquitous, that sometimes these are called star sweaters. And then there's different elements that are frequently used, and that's a specific kind of construction method. All of that was really interesting. And then some of our students had sweaters that they had designed for themselves and were in this book. And they're not graded for multiple sizes. It's like, this is the instructions for the sweater that person made for their body. So that is what I've been working on. There's one in there that I've always loved, and I realized I wasn't going to need to adjust it at all in terms of size. And the yarn that I chose, I bought it almost a year ago, exactly the right gauge, so I wasn't going to have to make any adjustments. And that ended up being really important because of how the stitch patterns are laid out in this particular garment. Usually when we're talking about gauge, stitch gauge is the most important. Like, you need to have the right number of stitches per inch so that when you cast on the number of stitches that the pattern tells you to, it's going to end up the right width. So that's the most important, is getting the width right, because often you can just knit to the length you need. Like, if your row gauge is off, but they're telling you to knit it until it's 15 inches long, you just knit it until it's 15 inches long. It doesn't matter if the original pattern needed 50 rows to do that, and you need 60 or 40, whatever. But that's why stitch gauge is more important. It doesn't mean that row gauge isn't important. And there are some areas of a sweater in particular where row gauge is important, and you might need to factor that in if you need to make modifications because of size, like you have longer or shorter arms, or you are longer between your underarm and your neck. So if you're doing like a circular yoke sweater or a raglan sweater, you have these increases at or decreases depending which direction you're working at specific places. And the idea is you have the same row gauge so that everything comes out the right length and you have the right number of stitches when you have finished knitting between the underarm and the neck. And if you don't, then you might need to recalculate your shaping rate. So like when or how many times you are going to be increasing or decreasing in that place. The place where I am most likely to need to make an adjustment, it tends to be sleeves, because those are really long. And if your row gauge is different, you could end up, depending on what direction you're working on, if you're working cuff up, you could be done with all of your increases when you're just right here. And then, so you're getting really wide fast, and then you have to knit straight up. Or your row gauge might be such that you have fewer rows per inch than the pattern is expecting. And if you did all of the increases at the rate that they said, the sleeve would be, 3 inches too long. And so you might need to recalculate how often you do those. And you would need to do that if your row gauge is different, and you would need to do that if you need a different sleeve length. Like maybe your row gauge is fine, but you need a longer sleeve or a shorter sleeve, you need to recalculate those. And I do have a video on that. I'll link to it above and down below on how you recalculate that. And lately for Technique Tuesdays, in the past 6 months, I've done videos here and there about shaping rates and calculating that sort of thing. So I was very pleased that my stitch gauge and my row gauge were spot on, so I wouldn't have to make any changes, because the way that the body of this sweater is laid out is that the majority of it has these vertical panels, and it's like there's like a repeat, a 12-row repeat of this kind of diamond pattern that's coming up the shoulders. Ideally, you'd want vertical symmetry between the bottom and the top. If you can't get it, that's okay. But so if your row gauge was different, or if you needed more or less length, you might want to think about how you're going to make that vertical symmetry work. But the main thing is that there are these 3 giant stars that are 33 stitches wide, 33 rows long. 3 of them coming up the front. They're all different, 3 different 8-pointed stars. And so the idea is they have to fit in this space. So you don't want to fit them in and then have this big sea of stockinette above it. You also don't want to run out of room and cut the star off. So if there was a row gauge issue, I might need to add extra rows of stockinette between the stars or take it out. But luckily I didn't need to do that. So that was a relief. And I did all of this figuring out before I cast on for the sweater. So there's like 3 things that I do before I start a project. One is I swatch. I do like swatching. Sometimes I don't swatch. If I'm working with a familiar yarn at a pretty common gauge, I might not swatch for gauge, but I might swatch the stitch patterns to make sure that I like the stitch patterns. Or I might say, well, I wonder how I'm going to do this element, and I'll use the swatch to try it. Well, what kind of button band do I want to do? I might use that swatch to experiment with. In this case, I just wanted to get the stitch gauge. So I got my swatch done. That was fine. My gauge was fine. The next thing I needed to do was to chart out the front and the back. The front and back are identical, except that the neck comes down lower in the front, which means in the back there's a 4th star that's smaller at the top of the back to fill in that space because the neck is up higher. So I wanted to chart them all out because, as I said, in this book there is a stitch dictionary in the middle of it, and it's got all these different stitch patterns. And so for the sweater that I want to knit, there was one stitch pattern that was specific for this sweater, and so that little chart was with the sweater pattern, but all of the other stitch patterns were in the stitch dictionary. So they're like, refer to star pattern ST1 for, use that. And so you have to use that chart. So rather than trying to knit along and then having to flip through books and look for that, I rechart them and then I put them all in a chart that I can look at, and I'll put a picture on the screen so that you can see what it looks like laid out. What I tend to do when I'm actually knitting is to paste that into a Word document, but trim down parts of it so that I can get a nice big section of it on one page. So here's the chart of the star that's nearest the bottom borders of the sweater, and then on this page I have the next star. And so I just work from this kind of abbreviated chart when I'm actually knitting, but that's something I do all that charting. And then the third thing I do is I create a spreadsheet. Every time I talk about my spreadsheets, people ask, can you show show you those spreadsheets at some point? I've done a few videos, so probably in season 2 and 3 of Casual Friday. I think one was in the fall and one was in the spring. There might have even been a third one at one point. But the word spreadsheet is in every one of those titles. So if you are searching specifically on my channel, you can search for the word spreadsheet and get those videos. If you're just searching YouTube in general, and if you're on an app, you can just search Roxanne Richardson spreadsheet, and then you'd get, again, the hits for those videos. My process evolves over the years, and it might vary from one project to another, because some projects need, or I want, information that I don't need or want in other projects. So one of the things that I for sure wanted to know for this project, and usually in any project, is how's the yarn usage going? So when I'm working with the first skein of yarn, periodically I weigh what's left of it, so that I can then figure out how much I've used. And because my spreadsheet's giving me running total stitch counts, I can calculate how many stitches per gram I'm getting, and then I can figure out, well, how many stitches can I get out of the yarn that I have, and how does that compare to the total number of stitches in this project? Oh, phew, I have enough. And so I figured out pretty early on in this project that I was only going to need 3 skeins, and it's going to be pretty close to 3 full skeins, and I had 4 skeins. When I bought this yarn nearly a year ago, I bought 3 skeins from the vendor at Yarn Over, our guild's annual event. I got home, I looked in the book again, and I thought, I'm not sure that's actually going to be enough yarn, because I might want to size this sweater up a little bit, and I might need more yarn. And I always prefer to have a lot of leftover yarn than to run out. I would always rather have an extra skein and a half of yarn than be 10 yards short. So I don't mind having extra yarn, and I could always turn that skein into something else. If I had extra. I got through the 2 sleeves, which is what you start with. You start with the 2 sleeves, and then you go into the bottom bands. The front bottom band and the back bottom band are knit separately, and then they are joined together by overlapping them at the 2 edges. So you have 4 stitches at each edge, and you overlap the front over the top of the back, and then you're doing like a 3 needle join, like if you were doing a 3 needle bind off but without binding off, or just a 3 needle join. And so those 8 stitches end up becoming 3 stitches. And you do that on each side, so you've eliminated 10 stitches, and then you do a purl round, and then you do a knit round where you increase each half of the sweater by 5 stitches. So you get back those 10 stitches that you lost, but you have that nice overlap. So I'm doing all this. I had just a few yards left in the first skein when I finished the bottom band, and so I started a new skein for the front band, and then I joined in the round, and I've been working with the second skein, and I've been so happy about how quickly this sweater is moving along, and then it's maintaining my interest. And I thought, this might be the first fingering weight sweater I have knit where I just knit it completely through. and without getting bored, because those stars are different and things are changing, and it's just interesting to me. And then I had gotten far enough along in the body that I thought, oh, you can really see the pattern coming out. I'm going to take a picture, and then I'll put a picture in my Ravelry project page, and then I'll post it on Instagram. And the thing is, I am knitting this on a 32-inch circular needle, and the sweater is like close to 38 inches in circumference. And so the sweater is bigger than the circular needle, so it's kind of bunched up. And I was trying to figure out how, what part of it I wanted to try to lay out so that I could really get a good picture of it. Maybe I just needed to get a second needle so I could have the front on one needle and the back on another. And I was moving this around, and I saw something that just horrified me. And the wind completely went out of my sails. My stomach sank. And I had to just put it to the side, and I had, what am I going to do? And here is the problem. And I just had not noticed it until that point. And we'll see if you can even see. Can you see that bottom band, and then you see the body? And compare that to the front where they're the same color. So let me do it like this so you can see. And maybe, I don't know how well you can see it in this. But the back band is definitely darker than the front band. So I pulled out the two sleeves, and they're that darker color. So I have 4 skeins. I had bought 3 at Yarn Over, and then I thought I need another one. I'd contacted the dyer. Do you have another one? And so this is an independent dyer, so these aren't dye lots, they're dye colors. But he seemed to think it was the same batch, that he did have one more, and he sent it, and it came, and I just had them all shoved together. What I didn't know at this point was whether all 4 of them are slightly different shades. That can happen, especially with hand-dyed yarns, like semi-solids and tonal yarns. The way they're dyed by layering colors on top of each other. Some of the skeins might get more of one color than another. So overall, one of them might have more teal in it, another might have more blue, one might have more green. So they just might not be the same. And so you watch out for that. And then as you are working with them, you might be working with 2 skeins at a time and alternating them, or doing something like that. It was too late to do any sort of alternating. So I didn't know if they were all slightly different, or if there's just one of them was slightly different, and which one was slightly different, the dark one or the light one. Because if it was the light one that was different, I was going to have a terrible time finishing the sweater, because it would just be such a stark contrast. But if it was the dark one that was the odd one out, then potentially I could get away with not having to re-knit much, if anything. So I pulled the other 2 skeins out, and they appear to be the lighter color. These are the other 2 skeins, and they do appear to be a lighter color. I'm going to have to, although it's really hard to tell in different lights, I'm going to have to knit them up into swatches and just really look at them. One of the things that we had to write about as part of the Master Hand Knitting program, there was a question about what do you do if you don't have enough yarn in one dye lot for a sweater and you need to use a different dye lot in order to complete it? Like, how do you go about doing that? So like I said, if it's tonal or semi-solid, you might be doing things like alternating between skeins. But if it's a solid color, what you can do is work like the sleeves a different color, or if it's a cardigan, you can work the neck band and button bands in the other dye lots so that those distinctly separate pieces that are in a different stitch pattern are the things that are the different color, and it's not going to be jarring. So luckily the sleeves are dark and the bottom band on the back is dark. Now the problem with just replacing that bottom band and then grafting it, like, you know, cutting off the bottom, reknitting the band, cutting the old one off and then grafting it, is that overlap issue. And trying to pick up stitches and knit down in the opposite direction wouldn't necessarily be any easier. So part of what I've been working through is how I'm going to reattach it and where. Because like I said, after the round where you're joining and the two bands together and you're working in the round following that is a purl round, and then there's a round where there's increases. So, you know, trying to figure out how you can graft that and make that work in different situations is tricky. So what I think I'm going to do is go ahead and finish it. Again, I'm going to have to swatch these other two and see if over by my window they seem like they were exactly the same color, and I look at them now and I'm not sure that these two are the same color as each other. This could be a situation where all of the skeins are different. I want to think about that. My hope is that they are this lighter color. I can finish the body and sew the sleeves on and see what I think of the sleeves in that darker color with the body. I am going to replace that bottom band because even though it's in the back, like when I'm wearing it, I wouldn't see it. Other people would see it if I'm walking around, and I'd be very self-conscious about it. I'd be very conscious about that, and I wouldn't want to wear it because of it. I wouldn't want to wear it out of the house because of that. So I will replace the bottom band. I don't know when I will replace it. Probably not right away. I'm going to get through the whole sweater and have it be done, and then see how I feel about those dark sleeves. So this might be something where maybe I can redo the bottom band this fall and reattach it and have that be okay, and then live with the darker sleeves, see how I think about it. And then February is always finish it February. Like, you pull out your old works in progress or UFOs and decide what you're going to do with them. And because I've done that every year, I don't have a lot of UFOs anymore, but I often want to fix things or repair things, that sort of thing. And so that might be when I reknit the two sleeves. So I just need to really confirm the colors of these other two skeins, and if they're close but would still leave a distinct line, then I'll do something like fade from one to the other, and so that it won't be super noticeable. And that's my hope, that is going to work out. So I think I'm only going to need one more skein to finish it. And then the final skein is the one that would replace anything that is darker. This is just one of those soul-crushing things where you just think everything's going your way and you're just yay, and then that happens. So I don't know if any of you guys have had that, where you've just been so happy with your project and things are just going along really great, and then you have this distressing. I mean, that's how things sometimes end up in the UFO pile, is because you're so upset you just can't deal with it and it gets shoved away. So that's another good reason for Finish It February, is to, you have to give things a time out and then take them out later. But I do want to finish this. I am really enjoying knitting it, and I do want to complete it. And I also want to be able to wear it out of the house without being self-conscious. So that's my plan. So that's where I am. And I'll go to the overhead and show you up close what is going on with the color differences and what's going on with the stitch patterns, because I'm really happy with the way that this sweater is working out in terms of the overall look and the size and the experience of knitting. It's just the difference in color between the two skeins that was really upsetting. let me know down in the comments what horror stories you have that might be similar or even wildly different, but still a horror story. So this is the chart. I use highlighter tape to kind of keep track of where I am. So I'm getting close to finishing this particular star, and then I've got these zigzaggies going along here. And this is what the sweater actually looks like. So here's that star right there. I've got my little zigzaggies there. Here's that horizontal band that I did after the bottom band. So you can see the color difference, really, at least I can in my monitor, how different those colors are. And what made me so mad was that I didn't notice it until I was like this far up. Like how could I not notice it? But I think it's because the front and the back are the same. And so when I'm starting a new round, I'm, okay, what do I have to do? Really paying attention to the chart for this half. And in the second half, I'm just doing that again. And anytime I'm looking at it, it's at the beginning of a round. I'm like laying this part out like that. And I wasn't looking at it until I started moving things around. So this is how those two are joined. You've got these little mini cables here. So you had a mini cable that was 2 stitches plus the purl before it and after it. So that's 4 stitches on each side. They were overlapped, and those 8 stitches became this purl, that knit, and this purl. And then the cables on this side and this side are continued up along the side, so they form the side seam. And these cables will be going all the way up to the shoulder. So that's maintained for the entire sweater, those little mini cables. And then on the sides, you've got these little seed stitch framing this diamond pattern. And then in the center, you've got the star, whatever star it is. So here's the place in here where I would have, if my row gauge was different, I could have added or subtracted. So I've got like 9 rows here and then 10 rows between each of the other stars. So that would have been where I could play with length if I had to make a row gauge adjustment of some sort. So it's a really fun pattern. It's just knit purl stitches with the little mini cables. Really, really enjoying it. It's fun. Like I'm really having fun with it. Well, that's it for this week's Casual Friday. If you have any comments or questions about today's video or suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below or join the discussion in my Ravelry group, Rocks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.